The Russia-Ukraine war is entering a dangerous stalemate. Russia launched a large-scale barrage of drones and missiles hitting apartment buildings in Kyiv, Odessa and Kharkiv on the ground. Moscow has made incremental gains in recent weeks, while the diplomatic path to ending the conflict remains out of reach. Moscow insists the war will continue until its strategic goals are achieved, warning that Kyiv may eventually be forced back to the negotiating table from a weaker position. Beyond the front line, Europe faces indirect escalation as tensions rise and Ukraine's capabilities continue to erode. All this and more on In Depth, so stay tuned. Russian missiles and drones hammered Kyiv overnight, killing several people and igniting fires across the city in the latest wave of strikes aimed at crippling Ukraine's power grid as winter approaches. Kharkiv was also hit, disrupting electricity and water, but Kyiv remained the main target. According to the New York Times, raid sirens sounded from midnight to dawn as Russia launched 19 missiles and 430 drones, most of which Ukraine's Air Force said it shot down. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky called the barrage a deliberately calculated attack on civilians and infrastructure, noting that dozens of apartment buildings in Kyiv were damaged. Zelensky added that Ukraine is responding with long-range strength, referring to its ongoing strikes on Russian oil infrastructure meant to undercut the Kremlin's war financing. But meanwhile, Ukraine stepped up its attacks on Russia's oil infrastructure with drone strikes on one of its biggest export terminals in Novorossiysk on the Black Sea coast. According to the Kyiv Independent, Ukraine stepped up its strikes on Russia's oil infrastructure, targeting the major Sheskars export terminal in Novorossiysk on the Black Sea. Ukrainian drones hit the port city overnight, damaging the oil complex and sparking a large fire and hitting valuable infrastructure. The news outlets added that the site is one of Russia's biggest oil export hubs and the endpoint for Transneft pipelines. Ukraine also said an S-400 air defense launcher was damaged in the strikes. The attack used long-range Neptune missiles and several types of strike drones. As diplomatic options appear to be narrowing, the Kremlin has said that Ukraine will have to negotiate with Russia sooner or later, warning that Kiev's position weakens by the day. According to the Economic Times, as Russian forces push towards Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine, Moscow accuses Kiev of rejecting peace talks. Ukraine counters that Russia's terms amount to surrender and are therefore unacceptable. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov insists Russia wants peace and remain open to a political settlement, but says Moscow will continue fighting to protect its security if talks do not materialize. Well, for more analysis, we're joined from Brussels by Mr. Nicholas Williams, a former NATO official, and from Moscow by Mr. Pavel Felgenhauer, a Moscow-based defense analyst. Good evening to you both, gentlemen, and welcome to In Depth. Let me start with Mr. Nicholas. And Mr. Nicholas, given the timing ahead of winter, to what extent do recent Russian attacks indicate a renewed campaign to exploit seasonal vulnerabilities in Ukraine's energy infrastructure?
Well, it certainly looks like that. I have no insight into the Russian military mind, but these waves of attacks across the whole of the energy infrastructure of Ukraine have been significantly more this year than last year, and indicate that the Russians are indeed renewing and intensifying their attacks in order to demonstrate to the Ukrainian population that this war is not winnable and resistance is futile.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Pavel, the Kremlin claims or are saying that Ukraine's leverage is fading near Pokrovsk. Now, how would you assess the current situation on the battlefield?
Well, it seems the battle for Pokrovsk is finally coming to an end. The city is already partially in Russian hands and most likely soon will be fully in Russian hands. This is an important strategic, important tactical success by the Russian military and an important psychological blow to the Ukrainian forces. But of course, Russia wants more. Russia wants a strategic success. It wants to break the morale of the Ukrainian forces and the Ukrainian population. So this will be through a combination of military pressure on the front line in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk and attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, to break the morale of the military and the civilian population of Ukraine and force Ukraine to Ukrainian resistance to crumble. That's what Russia wants to achieve, but that is not yet achieved, but that's the main strategic goal.
So we're speaking here about a military and a psychological warfare here. Mr. Nicholas, what does the use of long-range Neptune missile and multiple drone types tell us about Ukraine's evolving strike capabilities?
Yes, the Ukrainians do have a defense industry. They have modified their cruise missile, which was developed in Ukraine, which is a sea-based cruise missile. Extended its range, extended its accuracy in order to hit targets about 1,000 kilometers into Russia. These cruise missiles, Neptune cruise missiles, don't have the accuracy of the Western missiles, but they're accurate enough to cause damage and nuisance value disruption to selected sites in Russia. So it's a mirror image of what the Russians are doing, but less effective because Russia is a huge country, and it has these sites dispersed, and Ukraine is trying to demonstrate that this aggression by Russia is not cost-free.
All right. So you're saying here that Russia is not really using its utmost force, right? Let me here go to Mr. Pavel. And Mr. Pavel, with Russia reportedly making gradual advances on the battlefield, is there a realistic military scenario where the current trajectory fundamentally alter the political calculus in Moscow or Kiev, or does the military action simply strengthen one side's negotiating hand?
Well, during this year, beginning from February, the Russian intelligence services, the SVR, uh, openly and officially has been saying that Ukraine is a failed state on its last leg, and that another push and they were going to topple, their resistance is going to crumble. So this is the main calculus of the Russian actions: to put more pressure, and then Ukraine begins to crumble and collapse. The regime in Kyiv falls, and Russia achieves its goals of getting a more friendly regime in Kyiv, getting the parts of Ukraine it wants to get, and having control over the other parts. All this long list of Russian demands basically requires that the present regime disappears in Kyiv, and that's been what Russia is trying to achieve. This is not; these offensives are not kind of an offensive to kind of break up the Ukrainian front and march on Kiev. It's putting pressure, draining the Ukrainian military dry with heavy losses, and waiting till their morale snaps eventually.
Right. Mr. Nicholas, while the world is waiting for peace, there is this ongoing strikes. Now, how would you characterize the current stage of the war, given that both the military and diplomatic tracks appear completely blocked?
Well, 6 or so months ago, the Western analysts characterized the war as a sort of stalemate. I don't think it's a stalemate. The Russians, as Mr. Pavel said, are making slow gains, steady gains, relentless gains, and in the hope that Ukraine's spirit, military spirit, will be broken. And I think the current state of the war is that it is a militarily attritional war. The Russians are steadily eroding the capacity of the Ukrainians to resist. But it is a strategic deadlock because, as you say, there is no grounds for peace. There is no
little
view.
ground, yes, for indeed.
Yes.
Indeed.
There's no view as to what the peace deal would look like because there's no consensus between the two countries.
And there is no consensus between both countries and also between their allies, both allies. Mr. Pavel, from your perspective, how effective has Ukraine's long-range campaign been in degrading Russia's oil infrastructure and war financing?
Well, this war, I would say, is coming right now to a climax because the attacks of both sides are becoming more and more long range and effective. And Russia is hitting hard, and Ukraine is trying to do the same. This week, they announced, the Ukrainian military, that they used this so-called cruise missile Flamengo for the first time. And that's potentially a very serious escalation because it has a warhead of over a ton, which is much, much more than the drones that they will be using previously. And it has a long range, apparently, and could hit important military and industrial targets deep into Russia, or maybe not. We don't know how many Ukraine has such missiles. How will the Russian air defense system fare against them? But this is an escalation. Both Ukraine is going to throw into battle everything it has, and Moscow will escalate, hoping that this will bring an end to the war by the other side, say, quitting the fight. So this is we're going into a time of serious military escalation, of deep attacks into both countries, a kind of war of the cities like it was in the Iraq-Iran war of the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Mr. Nicholas, Moscow warns that Kiev's negotiating position is weakening by the day. Now, how do you assess whether Ukraine's position is truly changing?
I think it's weakening, but there is still a lot of resistance. There is still a lot of support from the Europeans who are furnishing the Ukrainians with advanced weapons. There is a problem, though. European support, though solid at the moment, depends on a flow of finance which the Europeans don't have. The Europeans are running out of money. That's why they're talking about using Russian frozen assets, mainly in Belgium, to finance this war. And the Ukrainians need about $65 billion dollars in order to just finance their government system and their defense in the next 6 months. Well, you can't do that without seizing Russian frozen assets. And this is still a contentious subject in Europe. So Europe may weaken its support, not political support, not vociferous support, but actually material support, unless the Russian frozen assets can be harnessed in favor of Ukraine's war effort.
Mr. Pavel, what should you make, or what do you make of the Kremlin's statement that Ukraine will have to negotiate sooner or later? What is that? Is it a genuine signal, a strategic signal, or pressure? What do you make of that statement?
Well, that is the summary of the Russian assessment of the situation, that Ukraine is running out of manpower, running out of resources. It's constantly attacked. Its infrastructure is attacked. The United States is not providing it anymore with weapons, at least not for free, and no financial support coming from the United States. Europe won't most likely be able to replace that fully. So Ukraine is losing this war. That's what Russian officials say time and again. That means they'll have to negotiate terms of surrender, basically. And that's what Russia is expecting. And there's a belief that new American sanctions won't come. They'll have effect, of course, but their effect will be in the future, and Ukraine will collapse earlier. So Moscow is hoping that this war will end soon and end in a Russian victory, an end on Russian terms, basically.
Mr. Nicholas, Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey has already warned of a new era of threat. How real is this shift, and what does it imply for NATO's strategic priorities?
Well, I think he's phrased it as a new era of threat. I don't think that it is a new era. NATO has designated the Russians as the most direct threat that it faces, direct and immediate threat that it faces for a few years now, since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. But I think what he's indicating is that it's a new era of vulnerability. I think the West, and particularly Europeans, are fearing that their reliance on NATO is necessary, but they need to have some other means of defending themselves in case the Americans pull the plug or weaken their commitment or negotiate over the heads of the Europeans in terms of Ukraine. So it's an era of vulnerability because American support is not assured, but also because they realize how much it will take to bolster their defenses collectively uh, from their current levels.
Mr. Pavel, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said Moscow remains open to a U.S. summit in Budapest, but only if it follows agreements from the Alaska meeting. Can you clarify what are those statements, what conditions Russia sees as essential for such talks?
Well, officially, neither Washington nor Moscow has disclosed what were the exact agreements achieved in Anchorage summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. But by inclination, at least the Russian side believes that the United States basically agreed with the Russian position, and that any future resolution of the Ukrainian crisis should be on basically Russian terms, which means that the so-called conditions should be met, which Russia has declined, that will prevent further conflicts in the future, which means basically Ukraine should be disarmed, its military should be disbanded, and parts of Ukraine should be under Russian control. And the rest would be basically, there should be a change in regime in Kyiv, Ukraine more or less turning into a Russian protectorate, no peacekeeping or stabilization forces coming in from NATO countries. So this is a kind of long list which Russian president has officially made public some time ago in June 24, and that position has not changed. And that's what the Russian conditions are. So that's where Russia would want to meet the United States to improve relations with Trump's America, but leave the Ukrainian issue on the side and on kind of Russian conditions.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Nicholas, Zelensky has warned Ukraine's allies that Russia is preparing for a big war in Europe by 2029 or 2030. How seriously should the West take these predictions?
Well, I think some in the West will take these predictions seriously. There is much to be worried about in terms of Russian military preparations, Russian strategy, and sheer antagonism to the West, which is matched by antagonism from the West and from Europeans to Russia. But I think the key problem that the Europeans are worried about is what's going to happen to this war. If Ukraine succeeds in holding off the Russians and there's a stalemate, there's no peace deal, then Europe will consider Ukraine to be on their front line, and they will support Ukraine militarily and even potentially troops on the ground. So everything depends on the outcome of this current war and this current phase in the war. If Russia takes or attempts to extend the war, say, to take Odessa, that will pose a huge problem for the West, because it's their idea of defending Ukraine in the Donetsk and Donbass regions, eastern Ukraine, I think will have failed. So yes, some countries will take Zelensky's warning seriously, but they're much more worried about what happens next.
And that point will return to next, but let me go here to Mr. Pavel. Mr. Pavel, Moscow insists it will not halt war until its strategic objectives are met. What are the minimal strategic objectives that, in your analysis, Russia must achieve to declare success, and how do these contrast with Kyiv's stated goals?
Oh, the Russian position again did not change at all. All the negotiations that have been between after Trump came to office with Steve Witkoff, Russia is actually very ready to be flexible on the roadmap and the timetable of achieving its goals. Different ways, different stages, but not the final goals themselves. Russia does not want a pro-Western Ukraine, not only member of NATO, but simply pro-Western Ukraine with a strong military that could be able to resist the Russian military. So that should be removed, basically. Large parts of Ukraine, which the Russian leadership and President Putin believe are actually part of Russia historically, should become part of Russia. Other parts maybe should go to to Poland and Romania and the Hungary, and there's maybe some kind of left rump Ukraine that will be semi kind of autonomous or sovereign, but still a kind of protectorate basically of Russia, and that will be because again it's believed that Putin says many times that Ukrainians or Russians are basically one nation and should eventually be together. So that is the end Russian goal, and that did not change. How that's going to be achieved is another question. But of course, Russia right now does not seek any conflict, real conflict with the West and with NATO. The Russian has resources and capabilities are maybe good enough to absorb not even all of Ukraine and not really to begin something more offensive in Europe. And of course, this war in Ukraine is really a revolution in war making right now, and all militaries in the world will have to look into how the experience of Ukraine and maybe most likely surely rebuild their military planning and building, and Russia would have to do the same, and that will require at least a decade or more. So that's right now, there's no question that Russia is not seeking a direct confrontation with Europe or NATO at all.
Mr. Nicholas, returning to what we were speaking about and referring to what here Mr. Pavel said, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says Putin miscalculates when he thinks he can outlast Ukraine's allies. Do you agree? And what does this mean for Europe's defense cohesion? And what do you have on what Mr. Pavel said here of that Russia has no intention at all of going into confrontation with Europe?
Well, I think Mr. Pavel is correct. They don't have any current intention, but the circumstances in Ukraine, if Ukraine loses this war, will mean that Europe will be divided, and divided in a Cold War which is more intense than the First Cold War, because it will be antagonistic, economically driven. There will be no scope for dialogue, and there will be infinite opportunities and excuses for confrontation and even violent incursions by particularly Russia in terms of the populations,
Right.
Russian populations in Europe, in the Baltic states, for example.
It is still remain to be seen. That was Mr. Nicholas Williams, a former NATO official, and Mr. Pavel Falconhauer, a Moscow-based defense analyst. We thank you both gentlemen, for your valuable insights. And I guess that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Many thanks for joining us in the stadium for more updates on Qnews.